Virginia is right in the line of fire when those spending cuts take effect, but Virginia Senator Tim Kaine says it is not too late to cut a deal that would replace the sequester. He is calling on Congress and the White House to work until the last minute to spare the Commonwealth and the nation the consequences. Senator Kaine joins us now. It's always a pleasure to see you. Good morning. So you remain very optimistic that perhaps these two sides can come together. Where are you?
We have to. I mean, it's a matter of will. We have to find an alternative, whether we do it in an hour or 5 hours or a day or 2 days. We've got to find an alternative. I took a tour around the state last week, kind of an armed services tour, given my membership on the committee, and everywhere I went, you know, in ship repairers and Hampton Roads, getting warn notices that they're going to get laid off. One small ship repair company, 450 employees, laying off 300 employees. 90,000 DOD civilian employees in Virginia are going to start getting furloughed a day a week beginning at the end of the month. And Allison, these are like, you know, the nurses who work at Fort Belvoir Hospital taking care of our wounded warriors. So this is a massive effect. We could lose as many as 200,000 jobs in Virginia when it's fully implemented. So we've got to stay at the table to find a deal. Yesterday in the Senate, there were two proposals, a Democratic and Republican proposal. The Democratic proposal got 50 votes. The Republican proposal got 38. The decision to filibuster meant that the 51 wasn't enough. But the good thing about it is, as soon as those bills both dropped, now there's a lot of discussion going back and forth in bipartisan ways about, well, could we do this or that? And I see a lot of that. So what I hope the president will do today is look the congressional leadership in the eye and say Congress has got to stop the gimmicks, sequester, continuing resolution. It seems like Congress is trying everything in the world to avoid making decisions and compromising, but we've got to have a willingness to compromise that's bipartisan, that's between House and Senate, and I hope the president kind of gives that strong charge today, as well as reminding the congressional leadership he's had a plan on the table. It's a $1.8 trillion deficit reduction plan for some time, and I hope he goes over the specifics of that plan, which is a mixture of program cuts, some entitlement reforms, revenues through closing loopholes, and then interest savings that would result. And you got to remind the congressional leadership about that plan and then open to their ideas as well.
Should we be encouraged by this new deadline? Now, I think everybody thought when the clock struck midnight, March 1st, that was going to be it. Now it's midnight on March 1st. Should we be encouraged by that?
Well, no, I would say, you know, it's funny. I actually think discouraged because there's just one self-manufactured deadline after the next. We know there's nothing magic about March 1. Why is March 1 this deadline? Is there some big economic issue on March 1? No. Is the world less or more safe on March 1? No. We put these manufactured deadlines in place. And I actually think the right way to get out of this artificial deadline mentality is for Congress to do something that it really hasn't done since 2009, which is start to write a budget again for the first time. Because normally you should be making your spending and your tax and your deficit reduction decisions as part of a normal annual budget process. So here's some good news. Both houses have agreed this year that if the houses do not pass budgets by 18, our paychecks stop. So we're working very hard on a budget, and the Senate House is doing the same thing. Now, when those two budgets come out, they're not going to look identical. So there's going to have to be some tough discussion and compromise, but at least we're returning to a normal budget practice for the first time since '09. And if we can just find over the course of the next hours and days, this willingness to compromise, we can at least mitigate most of the sequester effects. There's some effects that have already taken place in the contracting world, but we have to stay at the table until we find a deal, and there's just no substitute for listening and for compromise and for Congress making decisions rather than coming up with one new gimmick to avoid making decisions.
I applaud your optimism. I think all of us are hoping that there is a way to not do the across-the-board cuts because some of the most vulnerable of us will be affected.
Absolutely.
But when, Senator Kaine, do you say, well, these two sides just aren't coming together?
Well, we just can't say that. I mean, we're not in a we're in a nation where this Congress, for all its warts, and it has worked pretty well over the course of 230 plus years, and there isn't anything. It's not sick building syndrome up there. It's not in the water supply. I mean, it's just in the character and inclinations of people who walk into the building every day. When I was traveling last week, it was interesting throughout Virginia. I had all kinds of people just tell me, just compromise and find a deal.
I was going to say, what did they say? Because you're looking at a human being who might not be able to put food on their table like they used to. What do you say to those people?
Well, that you're hearing their stories, and in every different way, you know, from the wounded warrior's wife, it was at Fort Belvoir, and this, you know, wounded warrior there getting treatment. His wife's right next to him, and she speaks up and says, what about my husband's nurse? You know, she's advocating for the Army nurse, the DOD civilian nurse who's there at that hospital. So you're struck, and people who are saying, well, this doesn't have any effect on people's lives, come with me. I'm going to show you some people who it's affecting now, and it's creating huge anxiety in a situation that's already too tough. But what they all say at the end is, just go up and find compromise and get a deal. And I didn't meet one person in Virginia who said, save my program by doubling up the cuts on somebody else. Nobody said that. They really believe that we should find a deal. The deal that I voted for yesterday would have reduced the cuts in half by putting some revenue into the equation, and taken the cuts, instead of making them across the board, as you mentioned, Allison, making them targeted. So, I mean, just to give you an example, the Senate had already agreed in a bipartisan way that we could do some dramatic reductions of some farm subsidy programs that are no longer needed. Well, let's do that rather than just across-the-board cuts on everything, because there's already bipartisan agreement that that's the right thing to do.
Got to end it there. It's been a pleasure talking to you. We surely will be following the story, of course, and I hope there is some sort of compromise.
Great. Thank you, Allison.
All righty. Tim Kaine, thank you so much. Senator Kaine from Virginia. Tony, over to you.